On a frozen morning in January 1936, a locomotive thundered out of Montreal, pulling the transcontinental express toward Vancouver. Its streamlined casing gleamed under arc lights, painted in a deep royal blue that would become legendary. The engineers called it the Monster. Maintenance crews dreaded it, passengers worshipped it, and for a brief, brilliant moment, it made the British Empire's most famous locomotive, the Flying Scotsman, look almost ordinary. This is the story of Canadian Pacific Railway's 2850, the first of the Jubilee class semi-streamlined 444 locomotives, a machine that embodied everything railway historians love and everything accountants hate: ambition without compromise, speed without apology, and engineering that refused to acknowledge the word enough. But here's what most people don't know. The 2850 wasn't built to compete with Britain, it was built to survive Canada. The year is 1934. Canadian Pacific Railway faces a problem that no European railway could truly comprehend: distance that destroys machines. London to Edinburgh, the Flying Scotsman's famous run, covers 393 miles. Impressive, certainly. But Montreal to Vancouver, 2,886 miles of mountain grades, temperature swings from 40 below to 100-degree summers, and track conditions that chewed through locomotives like kindling. The Rockies alone presented grades that made British engineers physically ill when they saw the survey maps. Henry Blaine Bowen, CPR's chief of motive power, understood the math. Every additional hour a transcontinental express spent crawling over those mountains cost the company passengers, mail contracts, and prestige. Speed wasn't vanity, it was survival. In the workshops at Angus in Montreal, Bowen's team began sketching something radical. Not a copy of British streamlining that was for flat countries and short runs. They needed a locomotive that could sustain high speed on flat prairie, then claw its way through the Rockies without assistance, then do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. The specifications they drafted would have seemed impossible anywhere else: a 4-4-4 wheel arrangement, 4 leading wheels for stability at speed, 4 massive driving wheels for power, 4 trailing wheels to support the firebox, 80-inch drivers, among the largest ever fitted to a Canadian locomotive, a boiler pressure of 300 psi, and a streamlined casing that wasn't just cosmetic, it was functional armor against prairie wind and mountain weather. But specifications are just numbers on paper. Building the thing was another matter entirely. The Angus shops in 1935 operated in controlled chaos. Riveters hammered through 12-hour shifts. The smell of hot metal and cutting oil permeated everything. In one corner, boilermakers assembled the massive firebox. In another, machinists turned the driving wheel centers on lathes that dated back to the 1890s, but still held tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The streamlined casing presented unique challenges. British streamlining, like that fitted to the Flying Scotsman after its 1934 Australian tour, was essentially decorative. Smooth, yes, beautiful certainly, but fundamentally cosmetic. The Jubilee's casing had to survive Canada. Engineers specified casings made from steel plate thick enough to withstand hailstorms, ice buildup, and the occasional impact from debris kicked up at speed. The cowling over the smokebox wasn't just aesthetic, it channeled airflow to improve draft and reduce smoke blowback in the cab. The skirting along the running boards protected the running gear from snow and ice accumulation that could jam mechanisms at the worst possible moment. Every curve, every panel, every access door represented a compromise between aerodynamic theory and maintenance reality. Too streamlined, and crews couldn't service the locomotive between runs; too accessible, and it would create drag. Chief designer H.B. Bowen personally approved every modification, often standing in the erecting shop until midnight, watching the pieces come together. The first unit, number 2850, rolled out of the Angus shops in December 1936. Photographs from that day show workers gathered around it, some grinning, some just staring. The locomotive didn't look like anything else on Canadian rails. The semi-streamlined shroud gave it a predatory look, like something designed to eat distance. The blue paint, officially Royal Hudson blue, though it wouldn't carry that name for years, caught the winter light and held it. Someone in the crowd reportedly said, "It looked fast just sitting there, they had no idea." The first runs were cautious. Test engineers took 2,850 out on relatively flat sections between Montreal and Ottawa, measuring everything: boiler performance, steam consumption, coal usage, bearing temperatures, riding quality. The data came back promising but not revolutionary. Then they opened the throttle. On a clear February morning in 1937, with a light test train behind it and orders to see what she'll do, 2,850 hit 112.5 miles per hour on a straight section west of Smiths Falls, Ontario. The crew later described it as effortless. The locomotive rode smoothly even at that speed, the sound barrier of those days for steam. No hammering, no sway, just smooth, brutal acceleration. For context, the Flying Scotsman's authenticated top speed was 100 miles per hour, achieved in 1934 during its Australian tour. Here was a Canadian locomotive designed for mountain railroading, exceeding that on what was essentially a shakedown run. But speed on flat track meant nothing if the locomotive couldn't handle the real test: the Rockies. The first transcontinental run with 2,850 departed Montreal in March 1937, pulling a full consist of passenger cars, mail, and express. The crew assigned to the run had a combined 60 years of mountain experience. They knew every grade, every curve, every place where the track did something unexpected. East of the Rockies, 2,850 performed exactly as designed. Across the prairies, it maintained speeds that allowed CPR to shave hours off the schedule. Coal consumption was higher than conventional locomotives, but within acceptable limits given the increased speed. Then they hit the approach to Kicking Horse Pass. The grade here averages 2.2% for miles, steep enough that freight trains needed helper locomotives, sometimes multiple sets. The 2,850, pulling a 12-car passenger train, attacked the grade without assistance. The fireman on that run, Frank Morrison, later described it in an interview preserved in CPR archives. "The boiler never faltered. We were shoveling coal steady, sure, but she was making steam like a demon. The drivers never slipped once. It was like riding a hurricane up that mountain." They crested the summit doing 30 miles per hour with a full train. Unheard of. Conventional locomotives would be doing well to manage 15. The descent was equally impressive. The locomotive's weight distribution and braking system handled the downgrade without drama. At Field, BC, the crew inspected the running gear, expecting to find overheated bearings or stressed components. Everything was within normal operating temperature. The 2,850 had conquered the Rockies like it was designed for them, because it was. Over the next 2 years, CPR built 4 more Jubilee-class locomotives, 2851 through 2854. Each incorporated minor improvements based on operational experience with 2850. They became the pride of the transcontinental service, regularly hauling the heaviest passenger trains over the most demanding territory in North America. Passengers loved them. The smooth riding quality, the speed, the prestige of being pulled by one of these blue monsters, it became a selling point. CPR advertising featured the Jubilees prominently. Fastest across Canada wasn't marketing copy, it was measurable fact. But beneath the prestige, the accountants were doing different math. The Jubilees consumed coal at a prodigious rate. At high speed, they could burn through several tons per hour. The streamlined casing, while functional, made certain maintenance tasks significantly more difficult. Access panels helped, but routine inspections that took 30 minutes on a conventional locomotive took 90 minutes on a Jubilee. The specialized components, those massive driving wheels, the high-pressure boiler, the complex streamlined shrouding, meant parts couldn't be shared with other locomotive classes. Every bearing, every valve, every piece of the running gear had to be stocked specifically for the Jubilees. Maintenance costs ran roughly 40% higher than conventional 462 Pacific types doing similar work. And then there was the matter of crew training. The Jubilees required skilled engineers who understood high-speed operation and firemen strong enough to sustain the coal consumption. Not every crew could handle them effectively. CPR management found themselves with 5 spectacular locomotives that cost a fortune to maintain and could only be operated efficiently by a small pool of experienced crews. The same problem, ironically, that plagued many British streamlined locomotives, including later iterations of the Flying Scotsman class. The comparison to Britain's most famous locomotive is inevitable, so let's address it directly. The LNER Class A 344-72 Flying Scotsman, built in 1923, became legendary for different reasons. It was the first locomotive officially authenticated to reach 100 miles per hour. It hauled the famous Edinburgh to London non-stop service. It toured Australia and America, spreading British railway prestige worldwide. But in pure engineering terms, the Jubilees matched or exceeded it in several categories. Top speed, 2,850's 112.5 miles per hour versus Flying Scotsman's 100 miles per hour. Load capacity, the Jubilees regularly hauled heavier trains over far more difficult terrain. Operating conditions, the Flying Scotsman ran on some of the finest maintained track in the world. The Jubilees operated in temperatures ranging from -40 degrees Fahrenheit to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit on track that experienced annual frost heave in conditions that would have destroyed most British locomotives. So why did the Flying Scotsman become a household name while the Jubilees faded into obscurity? Marketing, preservation, and timing. The LNER understood publicity. They named their locomotives, they photographed them, they created events around them. The Flying Scotsman became a brand, a symbol of British engineering excellence. The Jubilees were workhorses, not show ponies. CPR marketed the service, not the locomotives. Outside railway enthusiast circles, most passengers never knew the name or number of the locomotive pulling their train. And preservation? That's where the story gets painful. The diesel revolution hit Canadian railways earlier and harder than British lines. By 1950, CPR had committed to dieselization. Steam locomotives, no matter how advanced, were finished. The Jubilees, with their high maintenance costs and specialized parts requirements, were among the first to go. 2,850, the prototype, the speed record holder, the locomotive that conquered the Rockies with effortless power, was retired in 1957. No one saved it. All 5 Jubilees were scrapped between 1957 and 1960, cut apart for scrap metal, those massive driving wheels, the high-pressure boiler, the streamlined casing that had gleamed royal blue across a continent, all of it melted down. Meanwhile, the Flying Scotsman survived. It had advocates, preservation societies, and eventually wealthy benefactors. Today it operates on heritage railways, appears in museums, and remains one of the most recognized locomotives in the world. The Jubilees exist only in photographs, technical drawings, and the memories of a dwindling number of people who saw them run. But let's talk about what those photographs show. There's an image from 1948, taken somewhere in the Rockies. The 2851 is hauling the Dominion CPR's premier transcontinental train around a curve with mountains rising behind it. The streamlined casing catches afternoon light. Steam trails from the safety valves. You can almost hear the exhaust beats echoing off the granite faces. Another photograph from the Angus shops in 1956. The 2,850, nearly 20 years old, undergoing what would be one of its final heavy overhauls. The blue paint is faded. The streamlined casing, once gleaming, shows patches where panels have been replaced after 2 decades of prairie wind and mountain weather. Workers in oil-stained coveralls stand beside it. They know this is probably the last time they'll work on this particular machine. One more image, the scrapyard at Angus, 1960. Locomotives lined up awaiting cutting. Somewhere in that line, though you can't identify it specifically in the photograph, is one of the Jubilees. The streamlined casing has been removed for easier cutting. Without it, the locomotive looks oddly vulnerable, like something vital has been stripped away, which of course it has. Here's what bothers me about this story. The Jubilees represented everything we claim to value in engineering. Innovation, ambition, pushing boundaries, solving problems that seemed unsolvable. They worked. They succeeded. They did exactly what they were designed to do. And we threw them away. Not because they failed, because they succeeded too expensively. The diesel locomotives that replaced them were more economical, certainly. Easier to maintain, absolutely. More flexible in operation, without question. But were they better? That depends entirely on how you define better. If better means more cost-effective, then yes, diesels were better. If better means more reliable, arguably, yes. If better means capable of sustaining 112 miles per hour while hauling a 12-car passenger train over the Rocky Mountains, well, that's a different question. The Jubilees existed in that painful intersection where engineering excellence meets economic reality. They proved that Canadian engineers could match or exceed anything Britain or America produced. They demonstrated that size, power, and speed could coexist in a single machine. They rewrote what was considered possible for steam traction, but they cost too much. In 1963, the Flying Scotsman made its famous trek across America, hauled through multiple states on a publicity tour. Crowds gathered to see it, newspapers covered its journey. It became, briefly, an international celebrity again. That same year, the last major Canadian steam locomotive, CPR 2816, a Royal Hudson, was still in occasional freight service, filthy and forgotten. No cameras, no crowds, just another obsolete machine working out its final days in obscurity. The difference wasn't quality, it was storytelling. Britain understood that engineering achievement means nothing if no one remembers it. They preserved their icons, marketed their heritage, and built industries around railway nostalgia. Canada scrapped the evidence and moved on. Today, if you want to see the Flying Scotsman, you can visit the National Railway Museum in York. It's there, restored, operational, celebrated. You want to see a Jubilee? You'll need to dig through archives, find old photographs, read technical reports filed in dusty filing cabinets. You can piece together what they were, how they performed, why they mattered. But you can't see one, touch one, hear one, because we decided collectively that scrap value was worth more than heritage. There's a small memorial at the Angus Shops erected in 2008 by railway historical societies. It lists significant locomotives built there. The Jubilees are mentioned, with their numbers and years of service. 2850, 2851, 2852, 2853, 2854, 5 names on a plaque, 5 locomotives that redefined what Canadian engineering could achieve. 5 machines that rivaled the most famous steam locomotive in the world and, in some measures, exceeded it. Gone. All of them. Railway preservation is having a renaissance. Heritage lines operate worldwide. Steam locomotives that were nearly scrapped now run tourist services, generate revenue, teach new generations about mechanical engineering. Britain has the Flying Scotsman. America has Union Pacific 844 and others. Australia has several preserved locomotives. Canada has fewer than it should. We're left with questions. What would it mean to see a Jubilee under steam today? To hear those 80-inch drivers accelerating? To feel the ground vibrate as one thundered past? To show a new generation of engineers what pushing boundaries looked like when boundaries were physical, mechanical, and unforgiving? We'll never know. That opportunity died in the scrapyard. Here's the final irony. In 2016, Canadian Pacific Railway restored locomotive 2816, a Royal Hudson built in 1930, to operation for corporate and heritage service. It's magnificent. It runs beautifully. It draws crowds wherever it goes. But the Royal Hudsons, impressive as they were, never matched the Jubilees for pure performance. They were workhorses, not thoroughbreds. They couldn't sustain the speeds, couldn't handle the same loads with the same efficiency. The one that survived wasn't the best. It was the one someone decided to save, and that might be the real lesson here. Engineering excellence doesn't preserve itself. Innovation doesn't guarantee remembrance. You can build the fastest, most powerful, most advanced machine in the world, and if no one fights to save it, it disappears. The Flying Scotsman survives not because it was necessarily the best locomotive Britain ever built. There were faster, more powerful machines. It survives because people decided its story mattered enough to tell, to preserve, to celebrate. The Jubilees were scrapped because no one fought hard enough to save them. Not because they weren't worthy, because the fight didn't happen. So when you hear about the Flying Scotsman's achievements, its speed records, its legendary status, remember this. On a frozen morning in January 1936, a blue monster thundered out of Montreal and proved that Canada could build locomotives that matched or exceeded anything the British Empire produced. We just didn't keep them. Was that a failure of vision, economics, timing, all of the above? What other achievements have we lost because we valued scrap metal over heritage? What other stories faded because no one thought to preserve the evidence? And most importantly, what are we failing to save right now? If stories like this, forgotten machines, lost legends, the engineering marvels that history tried to erase, are worth remembering, then subscribe to this channel, because there are hundreds more waiting to be told. Stories buried in archives, rusting in scrapyards, fading from memory. Someone has to remember them. Will it be you?